The rifle shot echoed across the valley, silencing the chirping birds and sending a shiver down Lillian Warren's spine as she crouched behind a fallen log, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild mustang. Wyoming Territory, 1876, was no place for a woman alone, but circumstances had forced her hand when her stagecoach was ambushed and the other passengers killed, leaving her to flee into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small satchel of precious belongings. 3 days she'd been running, sleeping in hollowed-out logs and drinking from streams, her once fine traveling dress now torn and mudded beyond recognition. The sound of horses approaching sent her scrambling deeper into the undergrowth, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "I know you're out there, miss," called a deep voice, surprisingly gentle despite its volume. "The outlaws that were chasing you are dead now. You can come out. I mean you no harm." Lillian remained frozen, unconvinced. Men's promises meant little in her experience, especially out here in the untamed wilderness. "I've got food and water," the voice continued, "and I reckon you could use both right about now." Her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when she'd found some wild berries that had done little to satiate her hunger. Slowly, she rose from her hiding place, legs shaking so badly she had to brace herself against a tree trunk. Through the branches, she could make out a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his tone. "Name's Preston Sutton. I run a cattle ranch about half a day's ride from here." Lillian swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "How do I know I can trust you?" Preston dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his distance as he removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered skin and kind eyes the color of a summer sky. "You don't. But I've been tracking those outlaws for 2 days now after they raided a settlement near my property. Found their trail crossing yours, figured they were hunting someone." He gestured to a second horse tied to his. "I brought along a spare mount just in case." "They killed everyone," Lillian whispered, the horror of the memory washing over her anew. "The driver, the guard, an elderly couple, just for a strongbox that wasn't even full." Preston nodded grimly. "The Blackwater gang, they've been terrorizing these parts for months. Sheriff's been trying to catch them, but they know the mountains too well." He took a tentative step forward. "May I know your name, Miss Lillian Warren?" she replied, still wary but desperate for human connection after days of solitude and fear. "Miss Warren, it'll be dark soon, and these woods aren't safe at night. My ranch is offering you shelter, food, and protection. I'll take you to town tomorrow if that's what you want." The sincerity in his eyes convinced her more than his words. Lillian stepped forward on unsteady legs, and Preston was quick to offer support, his touch respectful as he helped her to the waiting horse. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the first tendrils of hope since the attack. "Just doing what any decent man would," he responded, helping her into the saddle before mounting his own horse. "Hold tight now. We've got a ways to go." As they rode, Preston kept a respectful distance while maintaining a watchful eye on their surroundings. Lillian found herself studying him when he wasn't looking the confident set of his shoulders, the way he handled his horse with gentle expertise, the pistol at his hip that looked well used but not worn with malicious intent. "What brings you to Wyoming Territory, Miss Warren?" he asked after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. Lillian's throat tightened. "I was traveling to meet my uncle in Montana. He's my only family since my parents passed last winter." "I'm sorry to hear that," Preston said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing family is never easy." "No, it isn't," she agreed softly. "My father was a banker in Boston. After he died, we learned he had debts. Everything was sold to pay them off, leaving me with nothing but a letter from an uncle I've never met offering me a place to stay." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "Montana's good country. But rough, especially for someone coming from Boston." "I didn't have much choice," Lillian admitted. "It was either that or marry Mr. Harrington, my father's business associate who was 40 years my senior. A small smile tugged at Preston's lips. Well, I reckon facing outlaws in Wyoming might still be preferable to that fate. Despite everything, Lillian found herself laughing, the sound surprising after days of fear and silence. Preston's smile widened in response, and for the first time since the attack, Lillian felt something other than terror, a small, flickering warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun bathing the landscape in golden hues. The Sutton Ranch appeared on the horizon just as twilight descended, a sprawling property nestled against the foothills with a main house constructed of solid timber and several outbuildings scattered around it. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and lanterns glowed in the windows, a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. As they approached, a young boy of about 16 came running from the barn, his eyes widening at the sight of Lillian. "Samuel, this is Miss Warren," Preston called out. "She'll be our guest tonight. Could you see to her horse while I help her inside?" "Yes, sir," the boy replied, taking the reins as Preston dismounted and moved to assist Lillian. Her legs nearly buckled as she slid from the saddle, days of exertion and minimal food taking their toll. Preston caught her with strong, steady hands. "Easy now," he murmured, concern etching his features. "Let's get you inside and settled." The interior of the ranch house was modest but comfortable, with a large fireplace dominating the main room and simple, sturdy furniture arranged for practicality rather than show. A middle-aged woman with graying hair looked up from the stove as they entered, surprise quickly giving way to concern at Lillian's disheveled appearance. "Martha, this is Miss Lillian Warren," Preston explained. "She survived an attack by the Blackwater gang 3 days ago and has been on the run since. Miss Warren, this is Martha Jenkins, our housekeeper and the heart of this operation." Martha immediately took charge, clucking her tongue sympathetically as she guided Lillian to a chair by the fire. "You poor thing, you're half dead on your feet. Preston, fetch some water while I get a meal together. And find one of your sister's old dresses, the poor girl can't stay in those torn clothes." Preston complied without argument, disappearing down a hallway while Martha bustled around, ladling steaming stew into a bowl and cutting thick slices of fresh bread. "Your sister lives here too?" Lillian asked when Preston returned with a basin of water and a simple blue dress draped over his arm. A shadow crossed his face. "She did. Rebecca passed 2 winters ago. Fever took her." "I'm sorry," Lillian said softly, understanding the pain of loss reflected in his eyes. Martha placed the food before Lillian, whose stomach growled loudly at the aroma. "Eat slowly now," the housekeeper advised. "Your stomach won't be used to much after 3 days of near starvation." Lillian nodded, taking a small spoonful of the rich stew, savoring the burst of flavor on her tongue. Preston set the basin and dress nearby, then took a seat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "After you've eaten and rested, we can figure out what's best to do," he said. "The stage to Montana won't come through for another week, but I could take you to town tomorrow. The hotel's simple but clean." Lillian felt a surprising pang of disappointment at the thought of leaving so soon. "I wouldn't want to impose any longer than necessary," Martha scoffed. "Nonsense. This place could use a woman's touch besides my own. Preston here works from sunrise to sunset and barely notices the dust gathering in the corners." A faint blush colored Preston's cheeks. Martha exaggerates. "But you're welcome to stay until the stage comes, Miss Warren. It's safer here than in town, especially with those outlaws still having friends in the area." The meal warmed Lillian from the inside out, but it was the kindness of these strangers that truly began to thaw the ice of fear that had gripped her heart for days. After eating and washing up with the water provided, Martha showed her to a small but clean bedroom, Rebecca's old room, though neither of them acknowledged this aloud. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in days, Lillian found herself thinking of Preston Sutton's blue eyes and gentle hands, wondering at the strange fluttering in her chest whenever he looked her way. It was foolish, she knew, to develop feelings for a man she'd just met, especially when she was bound for Montana. Yet as sleep claimed her, it was his face that drifted through her dreams, offering safety in a world that had proven anything but safe. The next morning, Lillian awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life, horses nickering, men calling to one another, the clang of tools. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, panic rising in her throat before memories of the previous day flooded back. After dressing in Rebecca's blue dress, which fit reasonably well despite being a bit loose in the bodice, Lillian made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was kneading bread dough with practiced movements. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted warmly. "You look much better after a night's rest. Coffee's hot if you want some, and there's eggs keeping warm in the oven." "Thank you," Lillian replied, pouring herself a cup of the strong brew. "Is Mr. Sutton around?" Martha's lips quirked knowingly. "Preston's checking the north pasture. One of the hands reported some fencing down yesterday. He should be back for midday meal." She paused in her kneading, studying Lillian with shrewd eyes. "He's a good man, you know, best I've ever worked for, treats his people fair and works twice as hard as any of them." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't. That is, I'm headed to Montana as soon as possible." "Of course," Martha agreed, though her expression suggested she believed otherwise. "Still, a week is a long time to sit idle. If you're feeling up to it, I could use some help with the mending." Preston and the boys are hard on their clothes. Grateful for the distraction, Lillian spent the morning helping Martha with household tasks, discovering an unexpected satisfaction in the simple domestic routine. By midday, she had mended 3 shirts, helped prepare a hearty stew for the ranch hands, and learned more about the Sutton Ranch's operations than she'd ever known about cattle ranching. Preston returned just as they were setting out plates for the meal, his face lighting up at the sight of Lillian in a way that sent those same butterflies swirling through her stomach. "Miss Warren," he greeted, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "You're looking much recovered today." "I feel much better, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Your hospitality has been overwhelming." "Nonsense," he responded, washing his hands at the basin by the door. "Anyone would do the same." "Not anyone," Lillian contradicted softly, thinking of the men who had attacked the stagecoach without hesitation, the cold calculation in their eyes as they'd taken lives for mere dollars. Something in her tone made Preston pause, his gaze meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "No, I suppose not everyone would," he agreed, a muscle working in his jaw. "This territory attracts both the best and worst of humanity, those seeking a fresh start alongside those running from their past misdeeds. And which are you, Mr. Sutton?" The question slipped out before Lillian could stop it, immediately regretting her boldness. But Preston didn't seem offended. His lips curved in a half-smile that transformed his rugged features. "A little of both, perhaps. I came west after the war, looking to leave certain memories behind. Found this land, fell in love with it, and decided to put down roots." The lunch bell rang before Lillian could inquire further, and soon the kitchen was filled with ranch hands, 8 men of varying ages and backgrounds who treated Preston with obvious respect and Martha with good-natured deference. They regarded Lillian with curious politeness, though none asked outright about her presence, taking their cue from Preston's matter-of-fact introduction. The meal was lively, with conversation flowing easily among men who clearly worked well together. Lillian found herself drawn into discussions about the cattle, the weather and local happenings, surprised by how comfortable she felt among these rough but decent men. As the hands filed out to return to their afternoon tasks, Preston lingered, helping clear the table despite Martha's protests. "I thought I might show Miss Warren around the property this afternoon," he said casually, though his eyes sought Lillian's with a question in them. "If she's interested, of course." "I'd like that very much," Lillian replied, perhaps too quickly, earning another knowing look from Martha that she pretended not to see. The afternoon sun was warm but not uncomfortable as Preston led Lillian around the ranch, showing her the corrals where young colts pranced beside their mothers, the barn with its neat rows of tack and equipment, and the small garden Martha maintained for fresh vegetables. "This is all yours?" Lillian asked, impressed by the size and efficiency of the operation. Preston nodded, pride evident in his bearing. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Now we're up to 2,000 acres and nearly 500 head. Took 8 years of backbreaking work, but it's worth it to build something lasting." "You've accomplished a great deal," Lillian observed, trying to imagine the determination required to transform wilderness into this thriving enterprise. They paused at a hilltop overlooking a valley where cattle grazed peacefully, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. The beauty of it stole Lillian's breath, so different from the confined streets of Boston. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's mine," Preston admitted, his voice softening as he gazed out over his domain. "When I first came west, I was angry, bitter about all I'd lost in the war, never imagined finding peace here, much less purpose." Lillian studied his profile, seeing the lingering shadows of old pain beneath his current contentment. What changed? He considered the question for a long moment. Time, hard work, learning that dwelling on what's gone doesn't build anything new. He turned to her, those blue eyes searching her face. "What about you, Miss Warren? What are you hoping to find in Montana?" "Safety," she answered honestly. "Security. After losing everything in Boston, I just want somewhere to belong again. And your uncle can provide that." Lillian hesitated. "I hope so. We've never met. He and my father had a falling out before I was born, but his letter seemed sincere." Preston frowned slightly. "You're traveling all that way to a man you've never met." "As I said, Mr. Sutton, my options were limited." A hint of defensiveness crept into her tone. He seemed to sense her discomfort and quickly changed the subject, pointing out a hawk circling overhead as they continued their tour. But the question lingered between them, unspoken but persistent. What kind of welcome awaited her in Montana, and was she trading one uncertain future for another? The days fell into a pleasant routine. Lillian helped Martha with household tasks, gradually taking on more responsibilities as her strength returned. She discovered a talent for cooking that had gone untapped in Boston, where servants had handled such matters. Preston often invited her to accompany him on his daily rounds of the ranch, teaching her about cattle breeding, weather patterns, and the economics of ranching with patient explanations that never made her feel ignorant despite her city upbringing. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes with Martha joining them, sometimes alone when the housekeeper retired early with her old bones aching. Those quiet moments were Lillian's favorites, when Preston would share stories of his early days in Wyoming Territory or listen with genuine interest to her memories of Boston. 4 days into her stay, Preston received word that the Blackwater gang had struck again, this time at her ranch 20 miles east. The sheriff had requested help from all able-bodied men in the area to form a posse, and Preston felt obligated to go. "I don't like leaving you," he told Lillian as he prepared his gear, checking his rifle and pistol with practiced movements. "But these men need to be stopped before more innocent people die." Fear clutched at Lillian's heart, remembering all too vividly the cold efficiency with which the outlaws had dispatched her fellow travelers. "Please be careful," she whispered, impulsively reaching for his hand. Preston's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "I've faced worse odds and come through," he promised. "Samuel and 2 of the older hands will stay behind to protect the ranch. Martha knows how to use a shotgun if it comes to that, though I doubt the gang would venture this far west." He departed at dawn with 5 of his men, the gravity of their mission evident in their solemn faces and careful preparations. Lillian watched them ride away, a prayer on her lips for their safe return, especially Preston's. The day stretched endlessly without him, Lillian finding herself glancing repeatedly toward the horizon for any sign of riders. By nightfall, when they hadn't returned, Martha gently suggested they both try to get some sleep. "Passes can be gone for days, dear," she explained. "No use wearing yourself out with worry." But sleep proved elusive, and Lillian found herself sitting at the kitchen table long after Martha had gone to bed, a cold cup of tea forgotten before her as she strained to hear any sound of approaching horses. It was nearly midnight when the distant thunder of hooves finally broke the silence. Lillian rushed to the window, heart pounding, relief washing over her as she recognized Preston's tall figure dismounting in the yard. But her relief quickly turned to alarm when she saw him stumble, one of his men hurrying to support him. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern and ran outside, heedless of propriety in her nightgown and shawl. "What happened?" she demanded as she reached the group of weary men. "Ambush," grunted one of the hands, helping Preston toward the house. "Boss took a bullet, but we got 3 of them bastards begging your pardon, miss." Preston's face was alarmingly pale in the lantern light, a hasty bandage around his upper arm already soaked through with blood. "It's just a graze," he insisted, though his grimace belied his words. "Inside now," Lillian ordered, taking charge with a certainty that surprised even her. "Martha keeps medical supplies in the pantry cabinet." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Lillian cleaned and properly bandaged Preston's wound, which was indeed more than a graze, the bullet having carved a deep furrow through muscle. Her hands remained steady despite her inner turmoil, years of assisting at charity hospitals in Boston serving her well now. "You've done this before," Preston observed, watching her work with pain-glazed eyes. "My mother believed in charitable works," Lillian explained, securing the bandage with neat, firm knots. "I spent many hours at Boston General helping tend to patients." "Lucky for me," he murmured, his free hand unexpectedly covering hers. "Thank you, Lillian." It was the first time he'd used her given name, the intimacy of it sending a warm shock through her system. "You should rest," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "You've lost blood and your body needs time to heal." Preston's eyes, despite the pain clouding them, held hers with unmistakable tenderness. "Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep," she should refuse. It wasn't proper to remain alone with him in his bedroom, regardless of his injured state. But propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the naked vulnerability in his request. "I'll stay," she promised, settling into a chair beside his bed. Preston's fingers sought hers again, and she allowed the contact, watching as exhaustion and blood loss gradually pulled him into slumber. Only when his breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep did she gently disentangle her hand and retreat to her own room, her emotions in turmoil. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow as she sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling slightly. In less than a week, Preston Sutton had carved out a place in her heart with his quiet strength, his kindness, and his unwavering integrity. But the stage to Montana would arrive in 3 days, and her uncle was expecting her. She had no claim on Preston, nor he on her. They were 2 souls who had crossed paths briefly during a journey that was taking her elsewhere. Sleep eluded her entirely that night, her mind circling endlessly between duty and desire, between the security promised by her uncle and the unpredictable future that beckoned if she followed her heart. Morning brought no clarity, only the practical concerns of caring for an injured man. Preston insisted on getting up despite Martha's protests, though he conceded to limiting his activities to paperwork in his study rather than his usual physical labors. Lillian brought him lunch on a tray, finding him surrounded by ledgers and maps, his injured arm held carefully against his body. "You should be resting," she chided gently, setting the tray before him. "Ranch doesn't run itself," he replied with a wry smile that quickly faded into a more serious expression. "Besides, I needed to think, and I've always thought better when my hands are busy." Something in his tone made Lillian pause. "What were you thinking about?" Preston set down his pen, his gaze direct and searching. Your plans, whether I have any right to ask you to change them. Lillian's heart stuttered in her chest. What do you mean? He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. When she complied, he continued, his voice low and earnest. I know we've only known each other a short time, Lillian. I know you have plans, commitments, but these past days. He paused, seeming to search for words. I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your kindness, the way you fit into life here as if you've always belonged, it's made me realize how empty this place was before you came. Preston. She began, not sure how to respond to the naked emotion in his voice. I'm not asking for promises, he hastened to add. Just time, stay longer than the stage on Thursday, get to know Wyoming, the ranch, get to know me better. If after a while you still want to go to Montana, I'll personally escort you there safely. But if not. His voice trailed off, the unspoken possibility hanging between them. Lillian's throat tightened with emotion. What about my uncle? He's expecting me. Write to him. Explain the circumstances of the attack, that you're safe but delayed. Test his reaction. If he truly wants what's best for you, he'll understand. It was so tempting to say yes immediately, to surrender to the feelings blossoming between them, but caution held her back. I need time to think, she said finally. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Preston nodded, disappointment flickering in his eyes though he tried to hide it. Of course. Take all the time you need. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo, the easy camaraderie between them now charged with unspoken possibilities and unresolved questions. Preston respected her need for space, never pressing for an answer, though Lillian often caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. On the eve of the stagecoach's arrival, Lillian still hadn't decided. She sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, her heart pulled in opposing directions. Penny for your thoughts, came Preston's voice as he joined her, moving with the careful deliberation of a man still healing. I'm not sure they're worth that much, she replied with a small smile. He settled beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling evening air. They are to me, Lillian sighed, turning to face him directly. I'm afraid, Preston. Afraid of making the wrong choice, of trusting the wrong person again. My father's death taught me how quickly security can vanish. My uncle offers a known quantity family, obligation, duty. And what do I offer that competes with that? He asked softly. She swallowed hard. Something I never expected to find, something that terrifies me because I've seen how love can blind people to practical realities. Is that what you feel, love? The hope in his voice was unmistakable. Lillian couldn't lie, not to him and not to herself. Yes, she whispered, but is it enough? Can feelings that have grown in such a short time truly last? Preston took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I can't promise it will be easy. Ranching is hard work and Wyoming winters are brutal. There will be lean years alongside the prosperous ones. But I can promise this: I will never stop working to make a good life for us. I will never stop cherishing the miracle that brought you to my door. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, he insisted gently. Not easy, but simple. Do you want to stay? Not for me, not yet. But for yourself, to see if this land, this life could be home. Put that way, the answer crystallized with sudden clarity. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I want to stay. The joy that transformed Preston's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds, and when he leaned forward to kiss her, Lillian met him halfway, her heart soaring with the certainty that she had found not just a man to love, but a place to belong. Dawn broke clear and crisp the next morning, the stagecoach due to arrive in town by noon. Lillian had spent the early hours composing a letter to her uncle, explaining her delay and her decision to remain in Wyoming Territory for a time. Preston had offered to take her to town to post it and officially inform the stagecoach company that she would not be continuing to Montana. They rode side by side, conversation flowing easily between them, the future stretching before them with promise despite its uncertainties. In town, Preston saw to the letter while Lillian waited at the small cafe, a cup of coffee warming her hands against the morning chill. He returned just as the distant rumble of the approaching stagecoach echoed down the main street. "All taken care of," he announced, sliding into the seat across from her. "Your uncle will receive your letter in about 2 weeks." Lillian nodded, a strange mix of relief and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. What if he's angry? What if he comes looking for me? Preston's expression turned serious. "Then he'll find you safe and well, making your own choices as a grown woman has every right to do." Her hands trembled around the cup, rattling it slightly against its saucer. The weight of her decision pressed upon her suddenly, all the unknowns, all the risk she was taking on faith alone. Preston reached across the table, his hand covering hers with steady warmth. "Drink slow," he said softly, understanding in his eyes. "There's no rush anymore. We have all the time in the world now." Lillian took a deep breath, her hands steadying beneath his. "All the time in the world," she repeated, a smile spreading across her face as the stagecoach rumbled past the window, continuing on its journey without her. Outside, the Wyoming sky stretched endlessly blue, the frontier town bustling with morning activity, and the man across from her, her cowboy. Her unexpected salvation looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever seen. It wasn't the life she'd planned, nor the destination she'd expected. But as Preston's fingers interlaced with hers, Lillian Warren knew with bone-deep certainty that she had finally found her way home.